Okay, we are officially recording. Um, so,
Woohoo!
well, woohoo, yeah. So welcome everyone to our How to Successfully Interview webinar, put on by the wonderful Caitlin and Misha. We're going to, I'm not going to take too much time interviewing, but just to kind of give everyone a rundown, this webinar does cater a little bit towards those who will be attending our MAPSI conference next week, but they definitely have some awesome information that is transferable and applicable if you're not attending MAPSI as well. So please don't feel like just because you might not be going to MAPSI that this information will not be helpful. Please know that it definitely is, and we're also more than willing to answer any questions you may have if you're not attending MAPSI. So please do not be shy. I believe on everyone's control panel there is a box for questions. I will be monitoring those so that Caitlin and Misha are able to stay on task and on time, but also so that they have time to answer your questions. So please do not hesitate to type in a question, and I promise we will get to it. We just might not get to it immediately. We might take a couple of breaks every so often to answer some questions. Um, so yeah, like I said, thank you all so much again. My name is Jess. By the way, I realized I never introduced myself. I serve as our MAPSI chair for 2017. So Caitlin and Misha have been awesome at putting this together. So I'm gonna let the two of them take over.
Perfect. Thanks, Jess. So, hello everyone in the virtual world. My name is Caitlin Bolduck, and I'm a resident director at Bloomfield College.
And my name is Misha Woodley, and I'm a community director at University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
All right, excellent.
So let's just get started.
Mhm.
Just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today by discussing how to prepare for interviews, what will be happening during the interview itself, and then follow up after the interview and what should happen during that after time. And then at the end, of course, we will have plenty of time for questions, I'm sure. So to get real MAPC specific before we jump into the interviews themselves, MAPC itself, as many of you may or may not know, it is an interview conference. So the purpose of attending MAPC itself is to ultimately interview for positions for next year. So basically, just some quick facts about MAPC itself. Remember, it's a small field, so many people will be seeing people around, like you'll be meeting a lot of faces. Use your networking to your advantage, but don't name drop excessively. Like I said, many people will, be touching base. If you have friends that are going to be there, they may already have those connections. Definitely don't hesitate to, meet new people and like branch out there. But remember, this is an interview conference, so if you just met somebody, maybe it's not the best idea to put them into your cover letter or something. But definitely, this is a time to be networking and getting to know other people in the field because you guys are eventually going to be the face of MAPC next year and years to come. One of the difficulties with MAPC itself is that you have to be on at all times. You are going to be surrounded by potential employers. In that same breath, that means the safe spaces for you will be primarily your hotel room, the one place where you will be ultimately alone and be able to kind of decompress from the day. But there will also be a room known as the candidate space or the candidate room. And that is just for candidates themselves. Employers are not supposed to be going in and out of there. And I say supposed to because sometimes candidates or employers who have candidates like to touch base with their students, but when they enter, their mentors, not interviewers anymore. But ultimately, it is going to be your place to decompress, to kind of look over your materials for your next interview or an interview to come, and to kind of just get your bearings and reestablish your center. Please keep in mind that Wednesday night there is a presentation at the hotel. So just please be prepared for that. And also, that will be starting the always on display part of being at MAPC. There will be interviewers there. They obviously won't be interviewing, but you may bump into a couple of them there. So it's always best to, still look presentable. Maybe don't show up in sweatpants, but just be aware of your surroundings at all times. But now we're going to jump right into what you should be doing to prepare for your interviews.
Right, yeah. So the first part we're going to talk about is the before the interview, the things you have to start considering. And what comes with that is scheduling interviews. And so we're actually going to have Jess do a live demo of how to work with the MAPC app.
Okay. As soon as Caitlin switches me over to presenter, I will bring that up for everyone.
Yeah, hold please.
Hold my screen. All right. So I believe I have it marked as showing my screen, so excellent. Okay, so just a really quick rundown of the MAPC interview scheduler. So this is what it looks like for a candidate when you first log in. You have a little box here that brings up pending interview requests. So if you receive an interview request from an institution, this is where it'll pop up. There's also messages. So I have a message, unfortunately, that Lanciano University has declined my interview request, which is A-OK. And then also there's a summary of your interview schedule there on the bottom. So the very first thing that a candidate wants to make sure that they do is update their candidate profile, which includes uploading your resume. Something really, really important, even if you're not attending MAPC, you always want to make sure that you have an updated copy of your resume ready for your interview. So whether you're doing a phone interview or you're going to an on-campus, you always want to make sure that your resume is as up-to-date to the day of your scheduled interview as possible. So if you update your resume in January and then you join a new committee and then you have an interview in March, add that committee between January and March for your most up-to-date resume so that you can also include that in some of your interview questions if necessary. To schedule an interview, super, super simple. There's a button that says View Jobs, and it brings up all institutions, their titles of the position they have open, as well as the opportunity to review job descriptions that they have posted. It also includes required experience if an institution does list that information on their profile. So for me, I would really like to schedule an interview with Shepherd University for their area coordinator position. So I'm simply going to click Send Resume. It'll load the little box. I will write my message. I will select which resume I'd like to provide them. So again, I want to do my most up-to-date one, which is not my default one. It is my Lanciano resume. And I will select OK. It'll think for a minute. And then what happens is the screen changes and it says that I have applied. So what I will do now as a candidate is I will wait until Shepherd University reviews my resume and my interview request. And then once they make their decision, up here in the pending interview request information will be their response. It'll say, so Shepherd University has sent you an interview request, date and time, please review and respond as soon as possible. And that's pretty much it. That's how a candidate requests interviews through the MAPC scheduler and starts communicating back and forth. And once an interview has been confirmed between a candidate and employer, it will then show up in the conference schedule. And then you also have the opportunity to block off your schedule. So as you can see on Thursday is a gray box. That's my lunch hour because I like to eat and I need to make sure that I eat. So that is also an opportunity for you. And I know Caitlin and Misha will also be talking about the importance of blocking off times for meals. But yeah, that's the interview scheduler. And let me
thank you, Jess.
Sure, let me switch back over to Caitlin. Okay.
All right. So you'll see on this slide, we also talk about the mailboxes that will actually be at the conference. And so you'll also have an opportunity at the conference to be communicating with employers via their employer box. And you yourself will also have a candidate box. And so just keeping that in mind, you'll notice back on one of the slides that Jess was showing, all of the employers have a candidate an employer number for their positions. And for example, E6, and you yourself will have a candidate number like C45. So one of the important parts about structuring your interviews is timing is everything and making sure that you're spacing yourself out in a way that's going to be beneficial for you. And so you don't want to be overzealous and do multiple back-to-back interviews with no time to have a break for a number of reasons. One of those reasons would be, one, a little bit of worrying that maybe if your first interview goes over by 1 or 2 minutes, that you then have to rush back to that waiting room for your next one, and worrying that maybe they called you early for that interview, and so giving yourself some time spacing those out properly for that. Another reason is, personally for me, I found when I was going through the interview process, I needed some time to decompress after each interview, maybe just to reflect a little bit on some of my answers. Maybe I really loved something I said and I want to highlight something I mentioned and kind of be a reminder for myself for a future interview. Or maybe in the opposite, being like, I didn't answer it the way I thought I would, and maybe just doing a couple of jotting down notes in the candidate room for myself. And so having those little break periods between some of your interviews will help you to have some of that kind of decompressed time and really structuring yourself the way you need to. And I would say what also comes with that is prioritizing your schedule. So for example, I know I'm not a huge morning person, and so my first interview of the day, if I have an interview at 8:30 a.m., probably not going to be my shining star best one. And so when it comes to prioritizing different positions and institutions that you're applying for, just making sure that you're spacing yourself out in a way that makes sense to you, and again, leaves you some time for decompress and note-taking and reflection. Like Jess was saying, we all love to eat, and so another important thing is to remember to give yourself that lunch break. There's a good wide gap of when lunch is served on Thursday, and so it's, doesn't mean you have to block off 11 to 2. That would be a lot of interview time missed. But, making sure you're giving yourself 45 minutes to an hour to go and have that lunch at the hotel. And then one of the other things to think about in terms of the employers at the conference is that some employers will be there collecting interviews, but they might not be there physically at the conference. Or they might be there on Thursday, but maybe they're leaving Thursday evening and they won't be there for the half day on Friday. And so you'll also have an opportunity to leave your resume with some folks that you want to take back to their campus and contact you later. And that's also a successful way of getting a position. That's actually how I got my grad position, was a subsequent phone interview that I ended up having after a MAPC resume drop-off. So there's plenty of ways to move through that. The next slide is just a little bit of insight on some etiquette with messaging with employers. So be prompt and be honest. So one of the things with getting, this is time sensitive, all of this, everybody is at the same time interviewing, and so you want to be mindful of giving yourself enough time to get back to people. If someone says, hey, Bob, we really want to interview with you today, and here's what we have available, you don't want to sit on that message because as other people are getting messages from them as well, they might be going and scheduling interviews and filling up blocks that you maybe intended on using. So being prompt is really important. And then the other thing is honesty. So maybe you have a first interview and then upon reflection, or maybe depending on some of the information you've learned, you decide that it maybe isn't the best fit for you, or some other situation. You might need to decline a second interview, or you might just find yourself no longer interested after scheduling. Really important to not just not show up for that interview, or just decide like, I'm just going to stay in the waiting room. You want to make sure that you're communicating with that employer as to kind of updating on your candidacy and just letting them know. So I just put a little example of what you can say to just make sure that it's very honest, but it's also respectful. So thanking them for their time, because obviously they took time to review this with you, and they took time to look at your candidacy, and just explaining to them that you no longer wish to be considered a part of their current pool. Another thing that might happen is you really do want to interview with them, but your availability that you have for Thursday afternoon doesn't really line up with the times that they have available for second interviews. And so that's important, is to also reply to those and say, hey, really still excited about this position, very much excited about talking about my candidacy further. However, upon looking at my schedule, my times don't fit with what you have available. And so just letting them know that, so they're not taking your lack of response as not being interested any longer. And then just being mindful of your correspondence. Anything that you're messaging with employers can be kept as part of kind of your candidate file that they're keeping. And so just making sure that all of those, responses and interactions are as kind of professional and respectful as they can be. So next is effectively researching institutions. So this one kind of going back to all of the schoolwork and studying that you've ever done for anything and the great copious note-taking you've done. This is something, if you're trying to sell yourself for a job, you want to make sure that you're putting in just as much work and you're making sure that you're taking the time to learn about the institutions that you're applying for, and not just, scanning the job description and saying like, all right, I'm going into that interview. So you might want to start with asking yourself some questions. What are your priorities? What are some things that are non-negotiables for you in an institution or a campus? That might be geographic. Some folks will have maybe a region or a state that they are tied to for a various number of reasons, and that might be a non-negotiable for you, and so you're not looking outside of, X state. The job type, and so there's a lot of live-on positions obviously that will be at MAPC, but there will also be some other student affairs positions, and so determining for yourself like how wide is your scope on that level, and what type of work environment and things like that do you want. Some places to start for your research. The first would be, the school's website, wanting to make sure that you're getting a little bit of a taste of, their culture and a little bit of taste of what they do in their mission. And so doing some of that research and then delving even more deep into that website and going to their personal Res Life page, and, making sure that you're taking down notes as you're doing this on things that you notice. You might notice a trend, something that was, mentioned in their mission statement that is then carrying over to an initiative you see on their Res Life page. That might be a really great thing to write down on your notes for that institution. I'll use Lanciano University as an example. You might want to write down those notes and make sure you're able to reflect those back in your interview, because anytime that you can make specific kind of points back to a university's interest or their mission, it shows that you took the time to look at them specifically. Since it's a meat market type of a conference, it's not a secret that you're interviewing with others, but when you're interviewing face-to-face with Lanciano University, you want to make sure that you're specific about why this school and what about them drew you to them. College Board is a great place to go for some just general stats on, their population, public versus private, maybe what some of the most popular majors are. Is it a STEM school? And if so, what interests you about working with that population? So knowing something about their students or their type of population will help you to navigate some of your questions and some of the answers that you're responding to in terms of what they're asking. Noting down department structure and titles is important. So you'll want to make sure on your, whatever note page you have for each institution that you're kind of hashing out what those are, because obviously in our field we have a lot of, RD versus CD versus RLC versus area coordinator, and so there's a lot of reporting structures for all of those that will be different at each institution, and so you don't want to go into an interview and be talking about your supervisory relationship with somebody and then you're using the wrong term or misunderstanding the structure of their department when it was easily accessible online. And so just making sure you're taking down those types of notes will be important too. Other things to highlight during the interview is just common experiences or interest areas you have. So maybe you have a really huge passion for sustainability, and you also notice on Lanciano University's website, it notes that they have started a number of new initiatives in their sustainability efforts. That's a great tie-in when they're asking you, one, what drew you to their institution, but maybe some of your follow-up questions that you're going to want to ask them are going to be about their initiatives, and that's going to show, one, that you took the time to research them, that you connected something that's an interest of yours, and that you've tied it into why you might be a good fit for them. And so anytime you can be specific, it's important because it will make you memorable. And when you're thinking about how many other folks are interviewing at a conference, it's important to keep in mind what's going to make me stand out. And then finally, preparing specific and pointed follow-up questions. Kind of already mentioned that, but it's important to kind of go through and make specific questions to that institution. You might have kind of a sample buffer question where you're like, okay, I know I want to ask every institution about their reporting structure or their on-call structure, but you might want to make it specific to something you saw maybe in the job description and highlight, it looks like as the description states, I would be doing this. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that structure looks like on a weekly basis? And so anytime, again, you can make that more specific in your follow-up. All right, so practicing for interviews. So important to get a little bit of kind of secondhand opinion if you can in terms of practicing some of your interview techniques and some of the answers you might already have jotted down for yourself as ways you want to answer a certain question. This might come in the form of asking a supervisor and saying, hey, like I'm going, either because you're going to the conference or maybe because you know you'll be doing some interviews soon, saying, I just want to get some practice under my belt that won't, you know, count towards anything and can just be practice, and having them or a mentor perform a mock interview. And I would say when doing this is to have it be as professional as possible, and so kind of mimicking the same environment you would be having at an actual conference or at an actual institution doing an interview. And so, you know, having them call you in from a waiting room area, having them bring you into an office area or whatever it is, and having as much as you can the environment around you, also mimicking what you would be having at an actual interview. And again, you can also be asking friends to, you know, perform in this capacity. You might, you know, give them some questions that you're kind of worried about maybe trying to answer, or you're not really sure what your responses might be to them. And so you want to prep them with like, hey, ask me these specific questions so I can see how I respond. So, you know, do that research about what your questions might be that you want someone to be asking you. And if you don't have the ability to maybe have a supervisor or a friend or mentor do that mock interview, at the very least, I would say to do a voice or video record of you talking about your responses. Not only does it give you a chance to practice what you might say, because you can read a question on paper and be like, oh yeah, I would kill that question. Like I have so many experiences to say about that. But then when someone actually asks you, you might be either grasping at straws, or maybe you're selling yourself short and you're not highlighting a really big part of something you've done. And so it allows you to both hear that for yourself and also to see maybe little things that you say, like maybe you say a lot as you're searching for another thing to say, and that might be important to hear as you're in an interview. Wow, I say that a lot, I didn't realize it, and that can kind of give you time to realize how you're going to replace that or just make it a little bit more fluid. And then lastly, just being aware of your body language, so making sure that you, as much as possible, are, you know, calm, cool, and relaxed, even though internally you might be like, oh my gosh, I want to kill this interview, I want it to be great. Making sure that, you know, you're not too closed off, wanting to make sure that you have an open posture. And it's okay to smile at your interviews. Please remember that. You know, you might have different interactions with employers. Some employers might smile. Some employers might be a little bit more stoic, but either is fine. But just be yourself. Just know that you can smile if you're talking about something that you're really passionate about. It's okay to, you know, have a little smile or have a little laugh about something, and just be mindful of how your body language is showing your comfortability in that interview. All right, and now so Caitlin will chat about. Oh, go ahead.
No, thanks, Misha. I'm sorry. So yeah, now we'll get into the actual interview itself. So before the interview even begins, you will have to go at MAPCE. You'll go to what is called the waiting room, and it is a big giant room that only candidates sit in, and they sit there basically to wait for an interviewer to come pick them up. So for example, if X university is coming to get you and you know you have a meeting with them at 11 o'clock, I would get there anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes early, because you never know, they may be coming out of an interview early, they may have just had a break, so you really don't know what time to expect them, and it is so much better for you to get there before they do, because there's nothing worse than, you know, potentially missing an interview or something like that. So please just try to be early coming to this room. So the room itself is essentially a bunch of chairs facing one direction, and you and the other candidates that have 11 o'clock interviews or whatever time interviews will be sitting in the exact same room. And it, like Misha kind of touched on, like while we all know that we're all looking for a job, it's actually not as intimidating as it sounds. Yes, the first couple of sit-ins may be a little quiet, but towards the end of the evening, towards lunchtime, you will start to get to know these other candidates and have started to talk to them and even created these relationships. So when you come in for your 9 o'clock interview, it may be a little quiet. People are still waking up, getting coffee. But by your 12 o'clock interview, there's like 3 other candidates that you know extremely well, and even spark conversation. It's definitely totally appropriate to have conversations while you wait. You absolutely do not have to be stark and silent while you are picked up. So with that being said, it's very important that you know that many employers have different pickup styles. That sounds very odd, but to go to your interview, because the interview room itself is a little confusing, it's most effective for the employer to come pick you up and then bring you to your specific table. So what you can expect is someone can simply come to the doorway and say, X University is looking for Misha, and Misha would just stand up and be like, hi, that's me, and leave. Some employers like to get extremely creative with this. Some employers will hold up a big sign, some will play music. It's happened. It sounds very funny, but it's very realistic, which is kind of funny, and it really reflects the overall feeling of the conference and also like the overall feeling of residence life. Like, we're not these stark stone people. We like to have a good time. We like to be fun. We're like the cheerleaders. So that is very much reflected in the pickup styles by different employers. So just be mentally prepared for someone to come into the door and do like a little chant, and then have to be the one to like stand up and be like, hello, like that, you're chanting my name. If you are very uncomfortable in that situation, and you don't do well with that, I would suggest that when they come in and announce you in the way that is like slightly uncomfortable, which I sincerely doubt, but it may happen, all you have to do is stand up, walk to the door, and introduce yourself either in the doorway or even outside of the doorway in the hallway, and say, like, hi, my name is, Caitlin, and I wasn't really comfortable like getting up in there, but I'm really excited for our interview. Because you can be honest, because not everybody reacts the same way. Now, we all kind of know this, but interview attire is definitely very important. Remember that these 2 days, Thursday and Friday, are all about interviewing, so please dress accordingly for each day of the conference. We definitely don't need to be showing up in jeans and stuff like that, but I'll get into the do's and don'ts in a minute. But when in doubt, because you may not have that best friend to tell you exactly what to wear, when in doubt, go formal. It's not unheard of for people to wear jackets, for people to wear heels. It may not be your personal preference, so just be yourself in that. You don't have to wear a black suit with a white button-down shirt. It's really up to you, and you can make it your own. Just please remember to be professional. So obviously, if you are going to be wearing a button-down shirt, please tuck it in. Please, have closed-toed shoes, be well-groomed, make sure your hair is, looking very nice, doesn't look like you just rolled out of bed. Gentlemen, if you have facial hair that you enjoy, please make sure that that is well-groomed. You obviously do not have to be clean-shaven. And ladies and anybody actually who wants to paint their nails, just make sure it's an appropriate color, or at least, looks well with your. Please wear deodorant, and I'll explain why I say deodorant in a minute, but also dress to impress. So obviously the don'ts are: do not wear jeans. This is a formal interview conference, so please do try to not wear something as informal as jeans. Please make sure that the cleavage is covered for those who have it. It's not a place where that should be completely appropriate. Make sure that your clothing is free of any wrinkles. And if there are wrinkles, I'm sure your hotel, if you call down to the front desk, they have an iron. I would suggest doing that if you come in on Wednesday to, call in, get the iron, and iron all of your clothes on Wednesday night, so that you're prepared for Thursday and Friday, because it may be difficult to get it at another time. Please do not wear heavy cologne or perfume. We are going to be in extremely tight quarters, and you will at one point literally be sitting within reaching distance of somebody else. So please. Remember, this is going to be the first impression that you'll be making with these people, and you want to make sure that it's a really professional impression that you leave on them. So really quick, obviously when you do the interview itself, these are some of the questions that may be asked. So it's going to, every employer has pretty much some stock questions, but there will be more specific questions per university or college. And I'll ask Misha to point out some that she personally feels are very important.
For the questions?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say it's not so much a specific question, but I want folks to just remember that any of these questions you want to tailor in some way to something you know about that institution. So for example, one of the questions says, faced with a number of tasks, how do you set priorities? And so you might want to touch on something from the job description that notes, well, it's funny, I noticed that your job description indicates I would be working with this group and advising this team and working on this. At my current institution, X, Y, or Z, and so because of that, I feel X, Y, or Z. So like in some way, you want to be tying back your answers to something that is going to make you shine or make you at least highlight some strength that you have in that area. So if it's related to tasks, you want to highlight why and how in the past you've managed your tasks. And so the point behind all of these questions really is to see what you're going to say, what experiences have you had that will benefit you in this area. And so as much as you can sell a past experience, it's going to benefit you. And so even if that means taking a little bit of time to jot down some of the experiences that you've had, as silly as that sounds, because we all have a resume and it lists some things that we've done, but our resume doesn't always deeply talk about the ways that we maybe worked with students on a certain project or how we worked with our colleagues on a certain aspect of the training team. And so jotting down some of the nitty-gritty, some of the things that you've had to do that were hands-on or required a little bit of forethought and prepping, it'll make it easier for you to call upon those things in the actual interview.
Exactly, and like these are all stock questions. Obviously, they will be asking a little bit more specific, but these are all just very specific examples of what could potentially be asked. Similarly to them asking you questions, this is also a time for you to be interviewing these institutions. Yes, of course, you all want a job and you want to come out of this with a couple of phone interviews or even on-campus interviews. But remember that you are also interviewing these institutions, and what that means is that you're going to be deciding where you want to go based on some of these communications. So make sure that you really ask and get all the questions that you want to know answered. These are very job-specific questions, but you can also ask about compensation if that's a question that you have. So, one of my personal favorite questions to ask an institution is, what are the major challenges that your students face? And that's because, Stevens Institute of Technology has very different needs as far as students are concerned as opposed to Sussex County Community College. So it really changes. It really explains very well what the students' big problems are and what you yourself can do and what kind of situation you will be going into. You should have about 1 to 2, maybe even 3 questions prepared per institution. And like Misha said, you don't have to ask the same stock ones every time. You can get as specific as you want, which is why during her presentation about what to do beforehand, you should definitely have, if you're doing your research and going through everything and there's just something that sticks out, that should really be a time for you to ask that question so you know exactly the answer and you can make your informed decision after that. Other items to remember, so really quickly, just kind of going over so you can visualize what will be happening at MAPC. You'll be in the interview room, you'll be picked up in a very upbeat manner, and you will be walked to your interview table. And the reason why I'm reiterating this again is because the interview room is not one room with one table with 2 people. The interview room is a very large space with many, many tables of interviewers, typically 1 to even maybe 3, but it's typically 1 to 2 interviewers per table. And most employers typically use 1 table, but some have 2 or 3, which means that there are 2 or 3 different teams interviewing for very similar positions or even the same position. So while you may go in with a smaller institution and that would be the only table they have, if you're going to see a larger institution, they may have multiple tables, so you may very well be sitting right next to somebody who is interviewing at the exact same time for the exact same position with the exact same institution. So just please be aware of that. It is going to be a little loud because everybody's trying to communicate effectively, and it will be very colorful because all the students kind of deck up their table, or all of the institutions like decorate their tables and kind of show up and show out for the interviewees. So please just be very aware of and prepared of what you are going to be walking into. While you're going through your interview, like I said, it's very important to ask questions, but I really strongly suggest that you, when you have your notebook out, you can absolutely take down the answers, and I really strongly encourage that because some of these institutions will kind of blur together with the length of Thursday specifically. You should really be using a new notes page for each school. You really don't want to start asking questions and then see that you have already been asking like other institutions the same or very similar questions. It's always just good to start fresh for every interview. But like I said, it's very important to write down anything and everything that you feel is extremely important and can affect your decision, especially the answers to your follow-up questions, because you have take something down and label it, you know, X institution, so that when you look back, you have your answer right there instead of having to really think about it. And the last thing that's really important is to take down the names of your interviewers as well as their school. Thank you cards, and Misha's going to get into this a little bit, so I won't steal her thunder, but thank you cards are extremely revered at this institution. They're very, very important. But, you know, I will transition that to the after the interview section.
Great. All right. So the first thing, and this might sound obvious, but I find that a lot of people don't think to do the thank you notes. And so this is going to be an important part of kind of putting a little bow on the end of the amazing interview you just had, because all of your interviews are going to be great. It's important to make sure, so we've put some pictures to denote a good and a not so great for an interview examples of thank you notes. It's important to make sure that you make sure that they're professional. You want to make sure that you're using the time that you have during the interview to quickly glance at their name tags. Generally, folks will be wearing something that'll denote their name. If they aren't, make sure you ask before the interview gets formally started. Just say, hey, I just want to make sure that I have your name correctly, and so you're able to interact with them using their names. And that'll also, again, come in handy when it comes to writing those notes after the fact. Tip-wise, I would say as soon as you finish that interview, you should be going to write your thank you once you get back to the candidate waiting area. And one of those is because the interview is still fresh on your mind, right? And so being able to touch on a specific thing that you had in that interview is going to be a lot easier to recall because you just had it 5 to 10 minutes ago. And so being able to say in that thank you note, one, that you appreciate their time taking the opportunity to speak with you about your candidacy, but also touching on something that you really enjoyed about learning about their institution, or learning that was an interest of both of yours, or a way that you can serve their institution. That's going to help them to recall who you were, because 2 weeks from now when they're back home and they're maybe sitting around in a room trying to figure out who they're going to do a phone interview with or an on-campus with, being able to look back at those things will make them go, aha, yeah, that was Bob. We did get into a really good conversation about sustainability and some of the things he's working on at his current place of work. So that specific topic is the key to your thank you note. So just writing, thank you, Ken and Sandy for interviewing with me, and just signing your name. That's not going to have the same grit to it as making sure that you're putting something specific content-wise into it. And again, just being as prompt as possible, because they're likely going to have runners that are going to their employer mailbox to check on things. And so you're going to want to make sure that they are getting that as soon as they can, and not waiting until the end of the conference and then realizing, oh my gosh, I still have all of these thank you notes that I never put in mailboxes, and now I have to go find some stamps because I can never find stamps when I need stamps. So it's important to just be on time with that part too. And lastly, and this goes for both, if you're actually going to MAPC, or if, down the line when you're going to go do your on-campus somewhere or anything like that, is to first pack the right number of outfits. So, for example, with MAPC being a too formal day conference, you want to make sure you always have an extra. So if you're going to go to an overnight somewhere, you want to make sure that you have one more of something than you're actually going to need, because you know, maybe something will happen, maybe a rip in a pants or something could happen, or you're like, actually, I thought that this shirt went with this pants, but I actually feel like I don't love it. And so being able to have some backup will really help you and kind of help to ease some of your nerves as you're prepping for your interview days. We already talked about thank you cards. Making sure to print your resumes on resume paper. This is another thing that I felt helped me to stand out when I was doing all of my drop-offs at MAPC, is having, you know, stapling my interview, or my resume rather, to the back of my note to employer. But I felt that mine stood out more because it was on resume paper versus, you know, the next one that might have been printed on computer paper. And so, again, that's just the little things that you can do to set yourself apart and show that you went the extra mile are really going to count when these people are interviewing with 20, 30 people. Making sure you bring all the research you did, because that would, you know, be unfortunate to forget all of the awesome things that you wrote down. And so making sure that anything you've printed out or jotted down for questions, that you're bringing all of that with you. Which leads into the next one, having either like a Padfolio or some sort of briefcase that can have all of your stuff in it, and not have to worry about like digging into different things to find different documents, just having things in a central location. The stapler is key. This is something that there will be staplers in the candidate room, so it's not that if you forget your stapler that you know, panic should set in. But I found that it helped to ease for me the worry of, oh my gosh, all, you know, X amount, 7 of the staplers are being used at different tables right now, and having to either wait for someone to have one available and put it back, or borrow one from the person sitting next to me at a table. It helped me to just have my own and just be able to do my own thing and not have to worry about anything else. And so making sure I had a mini stapler with me as part of my packing list was helpful. You want to make sure you're avoiding the paper clips, because again, with mailboxes, you know, things can get, you know, unsorted, and then it's like, oh wait, they just got the front half of my resume, not the back half. So you don't want to be ending up in those types of situations. Pens, you know, pencils, things like that. A lint brush, for whatever reason, I attract a lot of lint, so I wanted to make sure that was on here. But sometimes you'll find that, you know, you put something on, or maybe the way that it was packed in your suitcase, it started to love up on one of your sweaters, and then you find yourself the morning of, when you go to put it on, that there are some things on your pants that you want to clean off. And so making sure you have that, and some shout wipes. Kleenex, you know, it's winter. Supposed to be winter, even though we're having a pretty mild one. But you know, whether or not you're sick, or whether or not you just have the sniffles or allergies or anything like that, just making sure you have a little packet of something on you can be helpful. And then lastly, you do want to make sure you have, you know, great breath, but you don't want to have gum. You know, you don't want to be chomping down on gum during your interview, talking about how great you are. So stick to, like, you know, an Altoid mint or something like that, which will be easy to be discreet about while still getting what you're trying to do, which is great breath. So that's kind of the end of our formal presentation in terms of the slides that we have for you all. But we did want to open it up for questions. As Jeff said in the beginning, we wanted to make sure there was time for you guys if you had anything from either our presentation or maybe otherwise, where you're like, hey, I still had a question about X, Y, or Z topic. We want to make sure we leave that time for you.
So if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the questions box there. I think I just saw a hand being raised by Tamika. If you have your, if you can, just type it in the questions box, and what we can do is get that answered for you. Also, just so everyone knows too, on the control panel, there is also a button that says handouts. I did put 3 different handouts in there for you all. Please feel free to download those. They're sample questions that a candidate could ask, so things that you might want to ask during your interview. There's also some sample questions of what you could be asked by an employer. And then there's also this really nifty thing I found a year or two ago called like the Student Affairs Job Search Packet, which kind of just walks you through all the different kinds of experiences and suggestions and questions that you could be asked all about interviewing for student affairs student affairs job positions. So those are two, or excuse me, those are three resources that I used a lot in my job search that were really helpful for me. So, and I'm all about sharing the wealth. So, okay. So Tamika's question: is there a chance that other institutions that are not on the current list will be at MAPC? If so, any advice on requesting an interview in person? Great question, Tamika. We still have institutions. We still have institutions applying and registering for the conference just about every day. We just added more employers last night. So the deadline is by Sunday evening is the last day for registration for MAPC. So by Monday, I don't want to say morning exactly just in case, but by Monday, all of the institutions that have registered for MAPC will be added to the list. And then, yes, there will still be an opportunity to request interviews at MAPC itself. We're trying to go digital as much as possible, but we do recognize because it's new, we'll be moving towards that. We're still going to be doing the paper way to us to get interviews as well. So the way that works is earlier, Caitlin, I believe it was talking about the mailboxes. So we use the mailbox system. So if you're really interested in, say, Frostburg University and you didn't get a chance to talk with them on the interview scheduler online, you can send them a message, and what they'll do is send you back a message that says that they would like to interview you or not. And if they do, you bring that slip to the interview scheduling area at MAPC, and we will help you schedule an interview in person. And then we update your schedule as well as the institution's schedule. Next question is from Nicholas Foley. Should I bring a business card to hand out after the interview? Caitlin or Misha, would you like to answer that one?
Sure, absolutely. Should you bring a business card to hand out after the interview? You absolutely can do that. It's really up to your personal preference. It also may be a great way to reach out to another employee, like to an employer who you haven't interviewed with, and give your personal information, because while the interview conference is 2 days, you may not get a first round or second round interview with a school that you're very interested in. So by attaching a business card, if you have them, of course, would definitely give them a way to contact you, and I would definitely attach it to like your resume. Your resume should have some contact information on it anyway, but business cards are really your personal preference.
Thank you. Another question from Nicholas Foley is, should I use a handshake when I meet with the interviewers, and should I do it before and or after the interview?
Did you say a handshake?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when your employer comes to get you from the waiting room area, you will kind of have a moment. Well, it sounds weird. You'll have some time when you walk up to them. They'll be usually standing at the very front of the room when they're going to then take you to the actual interviewing room themselves. You'll have a moment to shake hands there. I would say it's appropriate at both that time and at the end of the interview. I don't think either would be looked at as like, oh, it's too soon, or that it's not in an appropriate place. But either Jess or Caitlin can jump in with any of their thoughts as well.
I definitely agree with Misha. Handshakes are extremely important in the beginning because it kind of breaks that awkward tension of like, again, like they can be a little overzealous when they call you. So coming up and saying, like putting your hand out and saying like, hi, my name is Caitlin, and like, continuing from there creates like a specific start point of the interview. So it really does help moving forward in that way. And it's also a really great way to close. I mean, nobody's going to judge you. I don't think you should, shake their hand 15 times throughout the interview, but definitely before and after would be the prime times to do so.
I 100% agree. And don't for me with handshakes, I'm really weird. Like I don't because I have been treated differently on handshakes because I'm a woman. So like just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I want a weak handshake. It also doesn't mean break my hand. So please, just don't assume because of genders and such. What kind of handshake they would prefer or what they need. So just to kind of keep that in mind too. I believe Lauren Smith has raised her hand. So Lauren, if you have a specific question, if you can type it in the box. Oh, there she goes. Is there such a thing as too many follow-up questions?
It depends. I think it depends. So you can definitely have, if they're like yes or no questions, I don't think, like 5 would be too many yes or no.
Did we lose her?
I'm wondering, Caitlin?
No. Okay. We might have lost Caitlin, so we obviously don't know what her process was, but Nisha, do you have an answer for
Yeah,
that?
I'll touch base on it. So I would say kind of what Caitlin was starting to say was about gauging the time. And so if you ask a question and they have a really quick answer, you're like, okay, great, I can speed on to my next question. But you might find that you've, with one of your questions, really kind of like hit maybe sparked an interest or a specific area of passion for one of the employers that you're talking with. And maybe they'll give you a really really thorough answer that you then respond to of like, yeah, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that such and such. And so sometimes one of your follow-up questions can turn into a little bit of a dialogue. And so I would say it's something you kind of play by ear, but I would say it's good to have, in terms of a sweet spot, 3 to 4 that you can comfortably kind of think of without having to maybe like, oh, go back and like find the question on your Padfolio. I would say 3 to 4 that you kind of are strong, that you already know, like, I definitely want to ask these 4 questions to Lanciano when given the opportunity. And then you can kind of from there gauge how much time you have left, depending on how those answers go, because sometimes, again, those answers can become a little bit of conversation, especially if you're having a great conversation with somebody about a topic. You also don't want to be cutting that off and be like, oh, well, actually, great, but I have my next question. And so just gauging the time, I think, works the best.
Sorry, I got cut out there for a minute.
Oh, you're glad to know you're safe.
Totally fine.
Mary had raised her hand as well. Please don't feel like you have to raise your hands if you just want to go ahead and type in questions. Like, I'll read them as they come in. So, Mary, if you want to go ahead and type in your question there, we would be happy to answer it. While we're waiting for Mary's question to come in, I just wanted to like reiterate too about clothing when you're at MAPC or even at any interview. Really, like, please know that it's really important to be yourself with your clothing and your outfit choice. Don't feel like just because you're a woman you have to wear a skirt. Like, that's not the case. Like, if you have a pantsuit, so like I have a pantsuit because I'm not a skirt gal. Please, wear that pantsuit. Wear whatever's going to make you comfortable, but what you also think really represents you well. So, you'll hear from some people, like, make sure you cover up your piercings, make sure you cover up tattoos and those the things, but it's not necessarily required, because we're in a very unique field, I think, where, having tattoos and piercings is very individualistic and very, kind of can sometimes make you stand out a little bit positively, and also they can be really cool conversation starters. So please know that your clothing is a further representation of you, and it's okay to be comfortable while remaining professional. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, question from Nicholas Foley. Is the use of hand gestures, such as waving hands when excited or explaining, appropriate? So, like, oh, I get that because, like, I talk with my hands a lot too. So, what do you all think?
Oh, I was gesturing the entire time that we were doing this presentation. Specifically within arm's reach, I actually extended both of my arms outward. But it's okay. Try to keep it in a smaller space. Like, I try to keep it, below shoulder level because I still do it a lot too. So try to like rein it in a little bit, but again, like, it's good to show that you're excited about something, or if a hand gesture helps you explain something better, I definitely don't want that to stifle you. Nobody's going to judge you completely if you have hand gestures. Most people actually do use hand gestures when interviewing or even just in regular everyday conversation. So definitely that may be where a good mock interview would be a good place to practice. But ultimately, like, it is definitely an appropriate thing.
I agree.
Okay. How many resumes should I print to bring?
Like 50. It also depends on how much you're scheduling before the conference, if that makes sense. So, like for me, when I was an RA going for grad positions, I went in like cold turkey first day, and I had all the resumes to hand out because I hadn't scheduled anything. So in that instance, I think I probably brought like 15 to 20 because I didn't have anything scheduled previously. So I guess it kind of depends a little bit on any communication that you might be having with institutions ahead of time, and with interviews you've already scheduled, and how many open slots you kind of see that you might have left over. So maybe anywhere from 10 to 15. But again, I think it depends a little bit on what you're scheduling beforehand, if you are.
Absolutely.
All right,
But what I will say,
go ahead.
What I will say is it is beneficial to have the extras because I know we touched on some of the people who are just collecting resumes at MAPC, and so I guess it's not even just a part of well, I have only this many slots. It's really also about, well, maybe I didn't even know that such and such university was coming and collecting resumes. I want to make sure that they take mine home, and so having the extras for that doesn't hurt at all. That's it.
Great. Do you think we should complete a mock/trial interview with an interviewer that we're not interested in to get the nervousness out of our system?
I've heard of people doing this before, but what I would suggest is that you do a mock interview before the conference, because I really don't want you to put yourself in an awkward situation in which you interview at like X university and you're really not interested, and then they consider you as like a top candidate. So you can absolutely do whatever you please, but just do keep in mind that an institution is going to be giving you a time slot that they could potentially be giving to somebody who is interested in the position. So while it's not like, unforgivable curse or sin or something, just please be respectful of employers' time.
Agreed. Agreed. How often would nodding when listening to interviewers be appropriate? How should I go about showing I'm an active listener without looking like a bobblehead? That is a great question.
I mean, I guess this just goes back to the doing a little bit of the practice, because it's not like there's a ratio. I don't want anyone to worry about like a ratio of like, well, I can only nod like twice, so I want to make sure I nod at like a really great thing they say. But like, kind of just, you feel it. You feel it, and if they're saying something and it's really speaking to you, maybe you give a slight smile while they're giving a response to something. But I would say sometimes getting some of those things out in your mock interview, it'll help you to see that that's something that maybe you do a lot. So maybe if you already have that concern, that would be a good thing if you're doing a mock interview with somebody, whether it's a mentor or a supervisor, to say, hey, one of the things that I want you to kind of keep track of, or just note down if you see a lot of it, is whether or not I'm nodding too much, or whether it seems like I'm overdoing that. So that way someone can give you some feedback. But I mean, as an employer, I don't think I've ever been in a position where I'm like, that person just nodded way too much and it really put me off. So it's really just more about like feeling it out and just kind of just being mindful, again, going back to the body language and what you're giving off, just being mindful and being present in that moment.
Kind of going back to like the body language and like the gesturing thing, because like so I have a psych background, so I have a super of listening body language response. So like when people are like talking to me, even when I'm in interviews, I find myself like going, okay, yeah, and like I nod and like that kind of thing. So like, and like she was saying, I think it's really just because it's part of who you are too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're just that way. It's just that's what you do. Um, what will the Wednesday night presentation at the DoubleTree include since Thursday is the first interview day? Great question, Erin. So it's going to be, there's definitely going to be a tour involved so that you can all start to get a feel for the space at the hotel, as well as some of our past employers as well as past candidates. We'll be kind of just doing something a little similar to this presentation about interviewing, but also some information that's like very MAPC specific on like, you know, what to expect, what this looks like. But a big part of it is going to be the tour and just easing some of the nervousness for you all, just to kind of start getting you comfortable with the space. Okay, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, so I'm going to put in the chat box to everyone, I'm putting my email address, so please feel free if any of you have more questions about MAPC in specific or about interviewing, please feel free to email me. As well, if Caitlin and Misha, if you want to put your
Yeah,
email
I'll throw my email in there as well.
Absolutely.
So then everyone has that. So, you know, if you have specific questions, you know, after this, feel free to reach out to us. And then remember too, the handouts are also included, and a recording of this webinar will be posted on the MAPC candidate page in probably a few days. Again, I really want to thank Caitlin and Misha for taking time to do this presentation today on behalf of MAPC. It's been awesome, and you all have been a fantastic audience. So with that being said, I really hope everyone has a good day, and we'll see you in Reading if you're coming, and if not, best of luck in all of your searching and endeavors.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.